Next, I'd like to introduce Bob Fisher of Bayshore Regional Sewerage Authority in New Jersey. So Bob was named the Executive Director of the Bayshore Regional Sewerage in 2003, and he currently oversees $50 million disaster recovery effort in response to Hurricane Sandy. He's been working with David and the New Jersey Environmental Infrastructure Trust. Bob, let's share your story.
Okay, good afternoon or good morning, everybody, wherever you are. My name is Bob Fisher. I'm the director of the Bayshore Regional Sewage Authority. That's us in that first picture right there. We're in the middle of the wetlands area, and that is the Raritan Bay in the foreground. Let's take a little closer look at where we are from a Google Maps standpoint. There's northeast New Jersey, northeast United States with New Jersey right in the center. So let's zoom in a little bit closer, and you can see the definitive Sandy Hook Peninsula jutting out into the Raritan Bay. Across from that, Staten Island, Manhattan, and also Brooklyn. And as we get in a little bit closer, you'll see that there are 2 points that jut into the Raritan Bay. The westernmost point, or the one on the left, is known as Conscom Point, and that is Delaware Indian for place of tall grass. And when you zoom in a little closer, there we are, right in the middle of the place of tall grass. This is the Bayshore Regional Sewage Authority. We're a 16 million gallon per day wastewater treatment plant. We service 8 communities in Monmouth County. We have about 90,000 residents that we take care of. We incinerate our sludge on site with 2 fluidized bed incinerators, and we discharge to the Atlantic Ocean through a 14-mile outfall pipe. On October 29, 2012, Hurricane Sandy came up the eastern seaboard and made a very uncharacteristic left-hand turn and punched New Jersey right in the nose, somewhere around Atlantic City. Atlantic City is about 70 to 80 miles south of where we are located, but which means that although we didn't get hit with the eye of the storm, we did get those northern winds that come off of the ocean and push the water up onto the coast and prevent the water from the rivers and the bays from draining back out again.
Hey, Bob, this is Kristen. Can you try speaking up a little bit? Some folks are having a hard time hearing you.
Sure. Sorry about that. So the impact to the community was total devastation. In some cases, entire streets were wiped away. And in locations where houses once stood, there was no trace of the house even being there. And that's that top center photo right there with just the front steps still visible. In other cases, when the house that did make or did survive the flooding, when the power did eventually come back on again because of damaged wires, there were fires that burned the houses down. All in all, about 250 homes were demolished. Many people left not to return. That picture in the center, in the very bottom over there, that's the iconic photo that graced the pages of Time magazine for a couple of weeks. That house was located about a half a mile from the treatment plant. At the treatment plant itself, about 90% of our process equipment was completely demolished, destroyed. We sit on a 24-acre site, and all 24 acres were submerged in salt water about 3 feet deep and stayed that way for a good 6 to 8 hours. And so process equipment destroyed, 80% of our electrical systems were destroyed. Our 2 sewage sludge incinerators were both destroyed. One was running at about 1,400 degrees when the cold salt water came in. You can imagine the impact of that. The administration offices with our records, our computer systems, and our files, not completely destroyed, but substantial damage. We lost communication. We did not have communication with the outside world for 14 days. No fax, no internet, no phone. Those of us who had cell phones, if you had any other service besides Verizon or AT&T, it was useless. So it was really cut off from the outside world. But what I want to talk about is the funding requirements that it left us with. Not only did we have the requirement of responding to that disaster, but we also had the requirement of funding the long-term restoration, funding the long-term mitigation, and funding the some resiliency work. Because of the way our treatment plant is built, a couple of the buildings were built at a higher elevation, and we did have undamaged elements inside of those buildings. And so our plan going forward is to protect those buildings from future storms also. And we also were moving forward on a 5-year capital improvement plan that we had no plans on setting aside for the next 5 to 6 years while we respond to the Superstorm Sandy damage. And so we had a requirement of all of these different elements that were all major funding elements that was quite concerning in the very beginning. And so we had two major funding gaps that we had to bridge. So the and I will say that FEMA was very responsive and filled both of those funding gaps. And I'll say what David said earlier, that for the Bayshore Regional Sewage Authority, the State of New Jersey Office of Emergency Management and FEMA worked very closely with us and literally met 90% of our needs. It was a fantastic program, and we consider Bayshore Regional Sewage Authority one of the success stories in FEMA response and funding. But if you look at the second bridge there, the permanent restoration, mitigation, and upgrades, FEMA will not pay for planned upgrades that we wanted to continue moving forward. And in a lot of cases would not pay for the resiliency efforts of some of the undamaged elements. And that's where the New Jersey Environmental Infrastructure Trust came in. They packaged all of these funding needs together in one very unique program called the SAIL program, and provided us with upwards of about $45 million to move forward. So at the Sewage Authority, we have 5 major contracts that we're moving forward with all at the same time. I shouldn't say all at the same time. We have a Phase 1, which entails 3 major projects, and a Phase 2, which entails 2 major projects. And at this point, 4 of those 5 projects are moving forward. What I want to do for the sake of this webinar is discuss some of the funding nuances of the SAIL program with respect to our Phase 1 loan, which amounted to $28 million. What you see here are the 3 major categories of funding that we needed that the SAIL program put together for us. Dave Zimmer and the folks over at NGAT put together a really unique program here in that of the $28 million, 5.3 of that, which is FEMA reimbursable. This is your damaged sewage pump that was underwater that needs to be replaced or repaired. This is your building that needs to have mitigation later on so that it does not get flooded again. 5.3 out of the 28 million, 15.3 of the 28 million is FEMA reimbursable. And then the Sandy SRF, the Sandy State Revolving Funds, another really good program for us because we did have a couple of buildings and some elements, like I spoke about earlier, that were undamaged that we do want to mitigate against future damage. And the Sandy SAIL program provides $2.8 million for that program, for those undamaged elements, with 19% principal forgiveness, which to us translates to a 19% grant. And then $9.9 million of that $28 million is traditional SRF. So we had that is the capital improvement plans that I was talking about earlier. Mainly, most of that is upgrading our incinerators to meet the new air emissions regulations. And so if we take a look at what does that mean for an actual contractor when he submits his claim, and what does it mean to Bayshore as far as cash flow is concerned. So let's look at an example of a contractor's invoice that comes in at $1.5 million. With that invoice, $819,000 of it comes from the FEMA reimbursable bucket, $150,000 of it comes from the Sandy SRF bucket, and $531,000 of it comes from the traditional SRF bucket. And so you can see the way this thing is broken up, and it's a very good program that covers all 3 of our funding needs. But I want to take a closer look at the $819,000 FEMA reimbursable portion because it's quite a cash flow that we go through, cash flow movement that we go through that needs, I guess, a graphic description to illustrate it best. So I put this little graphic together here. I want to introduce the players. In the bottom right-hand corner, there are your contractors. The bottom left-hand corner, there's the Bayshore Regional Sewage Authority. Upper left-hand corner, that's the NJEIT and the DEP. In the upper right-hand corner, that's the State Office of Emergency Management and FEMA. So to start off with, the contractor submits an invoice to the Bayshore Regional Sewage Authority for $1.5 million. $819,000 of that is FEMA reimbursable. The Sewage Authority pays the contractor the $1.5 million and submits a reimbursement request to the NJEIT for $1.5 million, but also submits the FEMA RFR, or the request for funding. As Dave mentioned earlier, the EIT handles that for the authority. So that gets submitted over to the NJEIT also, and that's $819,000. EIT reimburses the authority the $1.5 million and sends over the RFR to the state of New Jersey for the $819,000. The state of, and I followed this, everybody with me? The state of New Jersey then wire transfers the FEMA funding over to the Bayshore Regional Sewage Authority, $819,000. We then wire transfer that $819,000 back over to the NJEIT, and the bottom line is, out of that $1.5 million disbursement from our $28 million loan, we've already paid back $819,000 of that, leaving us with a loan of $681,000. And within a 3-year period, that converts over to a long-term loan. And the conversion of that loan is at 75% zero interest and 25% AAA rated interest. It has allowed the authority to recover from Superstorm Sandy through the mitigation, restoration of our processes. There's the electrical, the incinerators, and our office. It has also allowed the authority to move forward with its mitigation plans. Here's an example of raising up the floor of a building so it meets the new flood level. Here's an example of raising up some of the motor control centers that were at a lower elevation that we raised up to a higher elevation to get up above the flood elevation. But in all cases, each one of the buildings has been retrofitted with a concrete reinforced flood wall that's attached to the building, and that's the tan stucco look that you see there with the white capstone on top of it. And the doors and openings have been fitted with flood logs and floodgates, and that's the mitigation plan at Bayshore. So the bottom line is, when we take a look at the flow of cash as of May 31st, 2016, the NJEIT has dispersed to the authority $14.8 million. 8.8 of that has been FEMA reimbursable. They have also dispersed $708,000 in Sandy SRF resiliency type work and $5.2 million in our traditional capital improvement plan work. Of the 8.8 in FEMA funds, we've already repaid 7.9, leaving us a balance of $885,000. The Sandy SRF comes with 19% principal forgiveness, so the $134,000 does not have to be repaid, so our long-term due there is $573,000. And the traditional is just a straight pass-through. The 5.2 that we borrowed will eventually become a long-term loan at $5.2 million. It's been a great program for us. It's been a quick bridge between contractor payments and FEMA reimbursements. FEMA reimbursements, for the most part, are all handled now through the EIT. A great short-term loan with 75% no interest and 25% low interest. Of course, the ability to pay back the loan as we go along reduces the interest that accrues. And the long-term conversion will be at 75% no interest and 25% low interest, and an 18% principal forgiveness for resiliency work is just like the icing on a cake. And brighter days are ahead. And that's my presentation.